Good morning. Good morning, sweetie.
I do comic like city stripe. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red parchment pastures, beautiful farmhouses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
All right, are we ready to try another project? This one should be a lovely dress, should be. And it is this one, it's a wrap dress, an American Sewing Guild Simplicity pattern. It's a wrap dress. I'm in between this one with the longer sleeves with these really cool open cuffs at the bottom. Okay, and it looks like theirs is practically floor length. Mine will probably be like, if those are her ankles, like right around there, you know. It is a wrap dress, but it's a fitted wrap dress, so it's not really huge, okay? And I think it's going to be really pretty. And one of the things I like about this pattern is it does have a princess seam on the front, but it has a special cup size pattern where you can have the option of what your cup size is to what princess seam you're going to be picking out. And once I get into looking at the pattern pieces, what I'm thinking is that I've had some requests for full bust adjustment type of videos, and every single pattern is different and every single body is different, and that can be a little bit tricky to do an all-in-one encompassing video. But once I get into it, I'm thinking if you can find, because this is just a standard princess seam that goes into the armhole, a standard princess seam bodice pattern that's going to fit your cup size, just keep that as your basic pattern, you know. And this one goes everything from B cup to double D cup. It's got a wide range. So anyway, let's get into it. Oh, fabric. So I did get this from the home dec aisle. It is 100% cotton, and I have pre-washed it, and it is this lovely, it's just a nice cotton. At first, it's about the same weight that like a chintz or something would be, but it's not shiny. So it's a very stable cotton, but it's got these really neat big prints. So I kind of like that. And on the pattern itself, it has the wrap, of course. It has facings in there. And I'm going to sandwich a dark colored piping. See if you can see here. This dark colored piping at the edge. So hopefully it will look somewhat like, hopefully it'll, well, I don't even know. I can't make it look, I can't hold it up to the camera and make it look like I want it to look, but we're going to have like a dark piping coming out at the edge, outlining where the wrap is. And I think that that's going to be a nice definition. So yeah, I have pre-washed, pre-dried everything with the fabric, so it should be ready to go, and we'll just get started. So one of the first things when you open it up is they give you the diagram of how to measure yourself to choose which cup size to pick. And so I measured my high bust and my regular bust, and I am like 2.5 inch difference. So I'm going to go with their C cup views, which means I pick the 1C, 2C, and 8C. But it's like they have it for B cup, for C cup, for D cup, for double D cup, the same numbering, just different lettering. So between having different cup sizes plus their pattern, the one I got is size 16 to 24. You have a lot of size options, so just measure yourself very carefully before you cut it out so that you can make sure that you're getting the right one. Now, I just opened this up. I haven't measured anything yet on here. but I just got a quick look at this sleeve piece that goes from here to here. That looks really narrow to me, so I'm probably going to be modifying this sleeve pattern just a little bit because I want to be able to move. You know, that's important to me. Okay, so I've got all my other pieces cut out, but I want to tackle this sleeve here because it is very narrow. Now, for the rest of the dress, because it is a wrap dress, it's kind of forgiving. So if you're a little bit loose or a little bit tight, the wrap is going to make up the difference. So that's one of the magical, wonderful things about wrap dresses. But that doesn't apply to the sleeve. So if I measure, and I'm doing size 16, so if I measure straight across here, which looks like one of the whiter parts, and then take in 1.25 inches, which is going to get me to where my sleeve actual width is once I take out my seam allowance, that's just over 13 inches. It doesn't actually have the size marked. It doesn't have like the bullseye with the measurement on here. Measure it. Because my arm is only 13. And so if this is 13.25, well, that's 0 ease. So in order for me to be able to wear this, 2 inches ease up here at the minimum for me. And I'd actually rather have 3. So what that means is I need to add 1.5 inches in width up here, but I need the final length to be the same because I need to be able to add that cuff thing down here. But just so you can see kind of where I'm coming from, my old How to Make Patterns, Sewing Patterns book, you know, fun. Traditionally, for a sleeve, a set-in sleeve like this, you have this line that comes down and a T that comes across, all right? And at that spot, it should be on each side of this center point, half the measurement of your bicep plus 1.5 inches. And that's not talking about seam allowance, okay? That's just the pattern itself, not including seam allowance. So that's where I get my general train of thought here. It is actually 14 1/8 inches that I have. And if 14 1/8, if my arm is 13 inches, is 1 1/8 inch that I have in ease. I need 3 inches, okay? 1.5 inches on each side. So that means I need another 1 7/8 inches to spread, okay? All right, so I'm looking at this, and right now I'm feeling a little bit frustrated because they went to so much effort to make sure the bodice fits right. And then they purposely give us a super narrow set-in sleeve. And I had trimmed these off earlier. I'm contemplating putting them back on because if I widen the sleeve enough that it fits me, either my sleeve cap's going to get way out of proportion or I'm going to spread it out enough that I'm going to have gathers up there. So it won't be a classic set-in sleeve. It'll have some gather. And honestly, on a dress like this, if there's a little bit of a gather, that's not the end of the world. And that's probably how I'm going to go. But just letting you know, what I'm looking at here is one option is I need to add a couple inches, okay? And if I had left all of my sizing on here, and I can tape it on again, it's not a big deal. It looks like if I go way out here to the size 24 and cut that would give me the width that I need. And I think that if I did that, I would follow through with the size 24 up and around the cap too. I may end up with some puckers up there, but that's life. But my only issue is it's going to adjust the size of the armhole on the bodice that I need. So this is my back and this is my front here of my bodice pieces. And so I would need to add a couple inches in there too to accommodate it somehow. So if I add it here, I need to accommodate it here, okay? If I add it straight straight up the middle, spread the whole thing, I will have the same size sleeve cap on top. I can just widen the entire sleeve and put a few gathers on there, and I can still make it fit in my armhole. And at this point, I'm thinking that that's probably going to be the easiest thing to do. But just letting you know, I'm kind of frustrated with them because this just doesn't make any sense to me if you're gonna do something like that. Especially, you know, giving double D options and everything. Why? Why would you do that? Anyhow, leaving all that aside, here's what I'm gonna do, because I want my bottom to stay the same size, because there's another piece, this little piece, that gets sewn on there, okay? So I have cut and taped this a couple times here. So if I open it up, I'm going to do that same thing where I'm going to create a pivot down here. I'm going to slice down to 5/8 inch in, create a pivot, and I'm going to open it up so that I have my space that I need up here at the top. Okay, can you see that? This white is tracing paper. So I'm going to open it up here, tape one side into place. If we have slight gathers on the top of the sleeve, we have slight gathers on the top of the sleeve, and so be it. So up here, I'm going to add 1, 2.5. You know what? We're going to make it 3 inches just because we can at this point. So placing this one side at the 3-inch mark, put a piece of tape there. And I'm just going to extend this. So now my center point is going to be halfway here, which is 1.5, which is right here. That's going to be my new meet up at the top of the shoulder point right there. So when I put the 3 inches up there, I thought I would clarify down here where this line is, where I actually need the 1 7/8 inches, I have 2 full inches. Okay, so I went downstairs, had some lunch, thought about it again. I still don't like this sleeve, but I've cut it out anyway, and I took one and just sewed up a little basting stitch seam, slid it over my arm, and I think it will be okay. It's not going to it does not have a lot of ease, but I think it fits like a fitted straight sleeve should be. My preference is always to have massive sleeves and everything, but for the style, I think it's going to be okay. So the first piece I'm going to start with is my bodice back, and there are a few things to mark on here. We do have a dart. So like usual, for holes, I am punching my holes out with my leather hole puncher, putting a scrap of leather behind the tissue paper so I do not cut my fabric. And then I will mark straight through those holes that I made here. And like usual, I am using my heat erasable pens because I like them. Being the rebellious person I am, I do clip my notches in, and I clip them between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch. Not very deep, just enough that if I know where to look for them, I can find them. Okay, and lastly, what I'm going to need to do is stay stitch this thing. So once I have it all marked, up here around the neck edge, it calls for stay stitching. You can use stay tape too. I will probably just stay stitch this one, and it's running a row of straight stitches. I like to run it within 1/8 of an inch of where my final seam will be. So I'll be putting my stay stitching at 1/2 inch because 5/8 is where my seaming is. That's going to go up here. So once I have that in place, and I know it's not going to stretch out of position, then I will come back here and fold up these darts. But before I fold them, I do like to draw my legs because they do help me to see better. Why am I marking this on the right side? I need to flip this over and mark my dots on the wrong side. So I will do that right now. Okay, Okay, so with both of these, what I do is I stick a pin down in one of the dots, let it come back up in the next little dot. So it's sticking straight through here, and pinch it up at the very top. And that's going to give me my fold line. Put a pin up here at this top dot spot. I don't know why it's curving here, and straight in. And also here, and then that way it's easy to see when I go to stitch. I stitch it from the outside edge in to the point. And let me go ahead and fold this one the same way and give those a sew. Okay, so I have my darts sewn and I've pressed them. And when you press them, first you press it just the way it was sewn, nice and flat like that, just to even out and set the seam. And then I press them both towards the center back, okay? Now that I have all of that done and my darts are done, I'm going to go ahead and serge around the entire piece. This part is optional because that will be encased in a facing, but I would say from the shoulder down and all the way around. Okay, so I have it serged around the edge. And while I was serging, I was thinking, I've had a few comments of people saying, why do you clip it and then serge it? Because you're just going to serge off your clips. And my answer is not really. Because when I'm serging, I just barely skim the outside edge. So like right here, I can see that's a clip, okay? And right here, there's a double clip for the back. And I can see it because I'm looking for it. But if I didn't know it was there, it can blend. So it's not a big old chunk taken out, and it's not really deep where it's going to risk getting into the seam and weakening the seam. But it's enough that as I'm assembling it and I'm looking for it, I can find it, if that makes any sense. So anyhow, this back piece is done for right now. I'm going to set it aside, and we're going to work on this front piece. Now this long edge here is also going to need to be stay stitched. It's cut on a bias type, and it's a very long stretch, so it could get stretched out of shape pretty easily. So there are circles down here, a circle up here for a sleeve, and notches. So I'm going to go ahead and make those markings, and on both pieces stay stitch it right here, and then serge around the entire piece. Okay, and lastly, I'm getting my side front little princessy seam piece here, and I'm going to do the same thing where I serge around the edges. This one doesn't have any circles to mark, so that is nice. And once I have it serged around, I'll press it just like the other ones, and then we shall assemble. Okay, so I have my side front, my front, and it's time to join them. Now on princess seams, there's usually a notch below where the main part of the curve is and a notch above. So what I like to do is match those two notches. Just ignore all this stuff for right now. Match from that notch to the edge here, and from this notch to the edge there, okay? And I'm going to lay it down so that the side front curve is showing. I'm going to take the halfway point and match that up. And then the front piece, this one with the big diagonal, I'm going to put a couple little clips into it. Not too deep, about 1/4 inch deep, just so that it's going to flex a little bit so that it can match up. Okay, now this side, the same thing. I'm going to put a couple little 1/4 inch deep clips. Take out that center one. I think I had it slightly off center, and just match it up. If you put one more in the middle, so that the curve of the bottom is going to go okay. And now it doesn't have to be exact up here at the edge. The point is that at the 5/8 stitching mark here, that it's matching there, okay? But by putting a few clips on the front piece and allowing it to flex some, when you're going to go ahead and sew it, it's going to work out so much better. So when I sew it, I could just get up to this point and then slowly, as I press it, working it around so that even if the edge of my fabric isn't exactly matching at that 5/8 mark right here, it is, and I can just work it through. And while you're stitching it, if you do it with the side front piece on top, it's going to kind of want to curve this way, and you can hold it that way as it's going under the machine, and it just makes it a lot easier to ease that in. So once it's sewn, you're going to press all of this seam allowance towards the front, all of it over this way, and press it down. So this part should lay nice and flat, and where you clipped it in here and it opens, that'll help that part lay nice and flat. This one I've already pressed. You can see it's laying quite well. And now at this point, I just need to stitch it to the back of the bodice at the shoulder, at the shoulders up here and the sides. So just matching those up, you know, there are the notches and the edges up down here. Do it at 5/8. And the same up here. There's a notch, a couple edges, sew that up there at 5/8 also. Okay, and now that I have these seams sewn, I'm going to press them both open and just kind of put this on my dress form for a minute and let it rest while I get the skirt put together. Okay, I chose the cup size C, and you know this is the dress form that I made based on my body. There's a video on that if you need to see it. But it does work pretty well. You can see that from here to the very tip of this side piece comes to the furthest point of the bust. And that's exactly what I want. And that from the front, it is a wrap, so you know there's always a little bit of an adjustment, but it looks like it's going to match up, so I'm really pleased with that. All right, so this is my skirt front piece, and we do have a dart up here. And in addition to the dart, I'm going to be marking my center front line, and I'm not going to mark the waistline, but just be aware it's way down here. This comes up much higher than the waist, so we're not technically supposed to be having the bodice end at the waist. It's supposed to be ending above it if you're looking for placement. Now I held this piece up to me with that at my waistline, and I think the actual length of this piece, view D, the longer one, is going to give me the length that I want. So I'm just going to use their length. Usually I shorten things, but I'm going to use their length. So I am going to mark my dart, mark this little side placement dot here, clip all of my notches, and then I'm going to make up this dart. Once I have the dart made, then I can go ahead and serge around the entire piece, except for this side. The long side that's going to be the open edge, that is actually with my selvage on it, I'm going to be hemming that in like that, so I don't need that part serged. Alright, so this is my front skirt piece. You can see I have my dart in, and I have it pressed towards the center, okay? And I have not serged around it yet. I need to do that. I wanted to put my dart in first and then serge it, and so I will do that. I serge it after I make the darts, because if I do it before, that puts extra layers of stitches here and it makes it a little bit more bulky. And serging after you make darts or after you make pleats is a lot cleaner. But once I go do that, what I'm going to need to do is deal with this edge here. And you have to make a little hem here, but they want you to leave the top 4 inches and bottom 4 inches open. So I'm going to put a little line so that I know I won't go past it. And they say to do it at 5/8, so I'm just going to eyeball where 5/8 would be, turn it, and turn it again so that that is pressed underneath. When I go to sew it, I will sew it on my machine, just edge stitching it in. Good morning, it is the next morning, and I have what we have so far just pinned up here on the dress form. And I want you to get a look at it, because the silhouette of this is actually turning into a very straight type of a dress. You know, sorry about that, kind of an A-line-ish. but up near the top it's very straight. And it's pretty, actually, with this print the way it is. It looks kind of oriental to me. But I've decided I don't like this. And what I don't like about it is that since it is a fairly straight skirt up at the top, without it being lined, and with just having this turned under, it just doesn't seem quite as finished to me as it should, if that makes sense. So actually what I'm going to do is line the skirt. I'm not going to line the top. I'm not too worried about that. But with it being straight, it's more like the back, like a straight cotton skirt walking around. I'm envisioning panty lines and things like that, and if I can line it, it'll be heavier, it'll be a nicer weight, I think, and I won't have funky seam lines that like abruptly end and then start up again and everything, because where it's sewn together is going to make up that. So anyhow, what I'm going to do is cut out my lining. Sorry about that. This is the lining I'm going to use. So here's my fabric. You know, it's not a perfect match at all, but it's close enough for lining, I think. It is, again, Bember Gran, but I do have a lot of it. And so what I'm going to do is cut the two skirt pieces, the front skirt and the back skirt, and I'm going to make them up exactly like I am making up the skirts, with a dart. And the way that I'm going to be assembling these, I'm going to assemble this. Once I have two total skirts, I'm going to combine them. So I'm not going to show you cutting out the skirt pieces in the rayon, and I'm not going to show you making darts and everything in here, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. That's what I'm going to do. I'll be pulling that seam out of the front over here. I'm going to be pulling this little seam out that I made to hem it. I don't like that, so I'm going to pull that out, and then once I have everything ready, I can just sew it all together. So just like for the front, I am punching out and marking my darts on both the lining and the main fabric. I've got them both stacked up here. Got notches everywhere, so I'll make the dart first and then press it, and these I believe are getting pressed towards the center back, and then I will serge around the piece after the dart is made and pressed. And I'll do that for both the main fabric and for the lining. All right, so I have my darts made and serged around the back skirt and the back skirt lining. I have the lining set over my dress form. And before I go any further, I need to work on, there's this little D-ring belt kind of situation that needs to get incorporated in here before we sew everything together. So I'm going to deal with this little piece number 6 with all of its little dots. I'm not actually going to mark the dots because they're kind of self-explanatory. These two are on the center fold. These are on the seam allowance. So what I need to do is fold my little piece in half and sew it at a 3/8 inch seam allowance this way, which is why these are only 3/8 of an inch from the edge. And get that stitched and flip it right side out. Actually, just because it's me, I am not going to sew it at 3/8 because these are the D-rings that I'm going to use. And if I sew it at 3/8, it's going to be too wide. So I'm just going to adjust the width of this little strip and the longer strap that's going to go through it to fit my little D-rings. And if I'm going to be doing that, I really should have a strap that's only about that wide, okay? Which is then putting a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I will be sewing this piece and this at 5/8 instead of 3/8. So once I sewed it, I didn't need that huge seam allowance, so I just serged over an edge just to kind of tuck it in. And I'm going to flip this little thing right side out like this. Okay. And now I need to go over and press it and put it through both of my D-rings like this. and fold it in half so that the edges are going to match over here, just like that. Trim some of this stuff off like here, but I'm going to go ahead and see the seam allowance on this side from here to there is 5/8. Okay, so that means from here I'm going to sew 5/8 in and just make a little straight stitch right across here. All right, and so now that this little piece is done, I need to work on the strap, and just like for the smaller piece, on the view I'm doing view D, you only need to make one strap. I want to do it in 2 different pieces. I just stuck a pin here where the center is. So basically I'm going to leave an opening here, you know, a few inches wide. So I'll start sewing on either side. And this is just giving me a smaller piece to turn. So I can, after I sew it, I can turn this side and then this side separately. So on one side I'm going to come all the way up and turn and enclose the end like that. And on the other side, I'm just going straight down the edge. Okay, so I'm just gonna stick the round part of my little turner in here and do one side, and then the other will be exactly the same, just opposite. But it's a lot shorter and a lot less chance of pulling something loose, doing it in half sections, than doing it in full sections. So let me go ahead and get this one flipped, and I will press it and show you how it looks. Okay, so I have flipped it and pressed it, and somewhere in here is that opening, but it's not that long, and there it is. It's not that long, and I don't think any of that is going to peek out, so I'm just going to leave it. I'm not even going to top stitch it. It's not going to give me any trouble, and we're just going to move on to the next step. All right, so this is my left front piece, and this little dot here is this little dot there. And I need to line up the top of my little band I made with that dot. Baste it on here for right now because I don't want my stitching of this to show up when I stitch the side seam. So I'll probably just put it like at 3/8 or something, just so that it's permanently attached, but it's not at the final stitching position. So that goes right there. And I did open up this side that I had previously, you know, folded under and hemmed. That is open now because I'm going to end up sewing the piping and the lining to this side. Okay, so now I'm going to be working on the right front. The strap went on the left front side. This little D-ring goes on the right front main opening. Now, I'm going to have a 5/8 inch seam allowance right here. So that's going to be my stitching line, okay? So I need to sew this. Oops, I need to put my little dot right here, don't I? Let me go do that real quick. Okay, so this little dot right here, which is basically 5/8 inch in this way and down that way, you know, it's not, it's just a pretty basic marking point, but our top of this piece lines up with that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, pin it, and also baste this on at about at 3/8 here. So I have a row of stitching from when I sewed it together, and then I'll have another one where I'm just basting it on. And now I'm just going to match up and sew the entire length of my side seams for my skirt. I'm going to put this down this way, making sure that my little strap is nicely hidden, matching up the tops, the bottoms, and the little notch that's right here, and sewing the whole thing at 5/8 and then pressing this seam open. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. Okay, so this is my lining. This is my fashion fabric. My side seams are sewn, they're pressed open, and all of this stuff is on the right side. This is on the right side, this is on the right side. So I am good to go ahead and sew the 2 side seams of my lining all the way up and not worry about anything for just connecting the side seam of the lining front to the lining back. Okay, so I am getting ready to sew my lining to my skirt. And if you remember, my plan is along the wrap edges, I'm going to put this piping so I have kind of a defined edge like that. And so because I placed this edge near the selvage, I'm going to actually use that line as a guideline for this. So my finished seam is not going to be exact at 5/8, but it's going to be straight. I am going to line my piping up so the edge of my piping is running along the edge of that color change at the selvage. So that's going to end up giving me a, slightly narrower wrap, but I'll be able to tell for sure that I'm straight, for one, and also that the seam next to the piping is going to be full color and not, going into the whiteness, because that wouldn't look good. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down, and then I need to come back with my narrow foot or a zipper foot or something and sew, straight stitch it on, running a stitch as close to the piping edge as I can, all the way down, so that this is secured on this fabric before I try to connect the lining to it. Okay, so I have the piping sewed on, and I want to show you something I found out. So this is the first row that I sewed, and you can kind of see there's some white that's visible. So I used this kind of foot for that one. I got as close as I could, but it wasn't great. So when I started the second row, I tried my usual narrow foot that I use for a lot, and it was even farther and worse than the first one. And I started poking around, and I got my invisible zipper foot out, and it worked so fabulously. So you can see it's actually stitching almost onto the blue part, but that's what I want. And look, there's absolutely no white showing. Well, there's absolutely no white showing. Super, super close placement, but with the invisible zipper foot, you can put it on either side. So the needle goes straight through here, and I could put my piping on either side of those vents. So that works perfect. That's what I'm going to be using. Just thought I would show you that. So at this point, I have two very large skirt pieces. This is my fashion fabric one. This is my lining one. So what I am going to do is match them up at the sides here. So I'm going to try to sew it with the invisible zipper foot first, and I'll just go a couple inches and see if that works out. If it works out great, I'll continue it. If not, I'll go off to that edge one, we'll work from there. But this side is not as critical because it will be on the inside. So what I'm going to do is just match up the sides here, and I'm going to leave like the bottom 4 inches of this open. So like from here down, I'm leaving that part open. These two will not be attached there because I need them loose while I'm dealing with the hemming process. But up both sides, just matching them up and stitching right alongside the piping. All right, so I sewed it, flipped it right side out, and gave it a quick press, and I think it's looking really nice. So this is the outside here. That is the inside. I did sew it again with my invisible zipper foot, and that seemed to work really well. So very happy with it. Down here at the bottom, the lining is still free, but that is good. And it's the same on this side over here. There's no little tab, obviously. But I got my piping on the edge and lining on the inside, so I like it. Now at this point, the directions want you to sew the bodice onto the skirt, and then they want you to put the sleeves on later. I think it would be easier to put the sleeves on the bodice when you're not lugging this skirt around, because this is just the skirt, and it's very full. Up by the waist, it's very narrow, but there's a lot of fabric down on the bottom half down here. So I'm going to actually skip ahead and put the sleeves in right now. All right, so I need to mark my sleeve pieces. Everything we went through with these pieces earlier. I am not going to mark these two little side dots that usually indicate where the easing stitches are going to go. Because I had to add so much, I'm actually planning on putting my ease stitches from notch to notch, and I'll just work it in and see how it goes as I get to that stage. But I am clipping my notches. There is a place over here by the elbow where on one side the notches are farther apart than on the other side, that I'll need to do a little bit of easing to get those two to match. All right, so I'm putting my big letter B on the back corner, as I do. And what I want to do now is for both of these pieces to go ahead and serge all the way around the piece, and then come back between my two notches and run 2 rows of gathering stitches between those two. Okay, so I have both of my sleeves serged around the edge, 2 rows of gathering stitches run between my notches, and I'm trying to pin the side seams together. So from the top down to the first notch, and from the bottom up to the bottom notch. And then I have all of this going on. Okay, so I've decided what I'm going to do with this, and it's not what the instructions say, obviously. But what I'm going to do is on the longer side, the side that needs to be eased together, I've marked with my pen where those notches are so I can see a little easier. And I'm just going to get a piece of clear elastic. Let me go get it. All right, so these are my two sides. This side is shorter distance than that side. This is the side that needs to get shrunk down to fit in there. All right, and so I'm just going to get a little piece of my clear elastic. I think I have it in the link somewhere. But the great thing about this stuff is that it goes back to its original size. So what I'm going to do is measure out a length that's 1 inch longer on each side than my space I need to cover. And that's just so that I have something that I can grab onto. Then with a little Sharpie, because if you draw on these things with anything else it tends to bleed, I'm just going to draw a little mark where those two notches are. Okay, so on this side up here closer to the between my 5/8 inch mark and my serging, I'm going to lay this down, and because it's longer I can hold it and stretch it out so it covers the whole distance. All right, and go ahead and stitch that on with a zigzag with my sewing machine. And that's going to cinch it up just enough to be able to match up to the other side. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I have just zigzagged over that elastic. I have the little mark up here and a little mark right there, okay? So it's gone back to the size that now those two marks are going to match up with these two marks. Okay, so let me go ahead, fold this in half. I can clip off these extra lengths. I don't need that now. That was just so that I had something to hang on to while I was stitching. So now I can go ahead and pin this and sew it on with a straight stitch and a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so while I'm going through this eased area, you know, just taking my time to try to make sure that I have as few puckers as possible, but you know, sometimes that just happens, and that is acceptable in an eased area like this. It's not a big deal, so I will try to be as careful as possible, but if there's a little pucker, it is not the end of the world to me. So I'm going to do the same thing to both of my sleeves. Once I sew it at 5/8, I'm going to press this seam allowance open. All right, so this is what it looks like. This is where that elastic is, and I think it went pretty well. There was 1 or 2 tiny puckers on one of the sleeves, but not much. So I'm happy with that. Made sure my B is still in the right place. Now for the view I'm doing, it's got this cuff thing, and this is the piece here, piece 14, and I need to cut 2 pieces of interfacing to go with it. I'm using my typical lightweight fusible interfacing. Okay, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces and fuse them to 2 of these. There are 4 pieces cut, 2 for each sleeve. So, and I do use a lot of very lightweight interfacing, and even on cuffs. And When I was younger, I used to use a lot of very stiff interfacing. And sometimes I would run into problems because it would be too stiff and you wouldn't really figure that out until the garment was completed. And at this point, I like things a little bit softer, and if I do want them stiffer, I can always starch it. But usually, just having a lightweight interfacing is enough to give it enough stability and body to do whatever I need it to. So there you go. Okay, so at this point I have interfacing on one, and I have these layered together, right side together, and this side is not interface. I have two sets. And they want you to sew down, over, and back up at 5/8 of an inch. And I was thinking about if I'm using piping or not on the cuffs, and I decided I am not, because it's a bottom edge, and the bottom edge of my skirt is not piped. So I'm just going to leave that as is. But I am going to stitch this a little bit differently than the instructions say, just so I can get a nice edge on the bottom and sharp corners, because these corners are open. So what I'm going to do is sew the bottom edge at 5/8 of an inch, just those two, not the sides, just the bottom edge, and then press that. Now I am going to trim off a lot of this edge, leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, Trim it off with my pinking shears just because that will help it lay flat. And then I'm going to understitch it. So opening this up, the interface side is the side that's going to be my public side, the side visible to the outside. So I'm pressing my seam allowance towards my private side, okay? From this side, actually up here, I'm going to run a row of understitching on this uninterfaced side with the seam allowances pointing towards it. And I'm going to run that row right here, just on this side of that seam, all the way down. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. You can see my understitching right here. And so when I go to flatten it out, it makes a really nice edge. All of that seam and everything rolls towards the underside, really nice. So now I can go ahead and do the side seams. And whereas the understitching is pushing the seam allowance over, I want it to be pushed over. So I'm kind of rolling it towards that one side. And I'm going to sew this at 5/8 straight down here. Okay, so now those are done. I'm just going to clip up the sides here. And when I get up to where all this thickness is, come across at an angle up here. Now I should be able to turn this right side out and get a really nice point on this little cuff without a lot of fuss on the outside. Get my handy dandy chopstick. And there you go. It's actually a really nice little point. I haven't pressed it yet, but it is fairly thin for having that much bulk in there, and I'm happy with that. Alright, so I was just looking at the instructions, pull up my chair, and it's interesting because what they want you to do is, you know, kind of finish off this edge with both sides together and just sew it on and press the seam allowance in one direction, call it good, and fold that down. So I just serged the edges of these to hold them together. And so on the right side, and I can see what's the right side because I can see understitching and stuff on the wrong side. So these are both right sides. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the piping up here onto the cuff because it is interface, so it is the more stable party in this relationship. So we always stitch the piping on the more stable one. I'm going to go ahead and do that for both of these, and I'm just going to line up the edge of my piping with the edge of my serging. I think that that's going to give me a nice uniform little stitch line. I have my piping sewn on, and I have just matched the two ends and just kind of folded my piping up and over out of the way with these little clips, and it's matching up with that underarm seam here. Okay, so I'm just going to stretch it over and try to even everything out and pin it on. And I am actually going to stitch this on by hand. It is kind of fiddly with the piping, with the ends of the piping, with the cuffs, with the tiny little opening. All right, so here's the thing. I know this is very late in the game, but I pulled this sleeve onto my arm, and I think these cuffs are going to drive me crazy. I really do. And I think I'm going to want to constantly push them up out of the way, and I think it's just going to cause more issues. So I am going to remove these cuffs. Okay, so I took the cuff off. Now, the length of this sleeve is like right here. So it's too short to be 3/4. I mean, it's too long to be 3/4. It's too short to be long sleeve. It's an awkward thing. And to just do a tiny little rolled hem just feels weird with all of the extra stuff that's on this dress. I think that for me as a wearer, it's going to be more comfortable to me, especially because of the slight chance of a tightness up here. It's not tight, but you know, it's not super big, of just shortening the sleeve so it's a standard 3/4 length. So I'm just going to take a few inches off, make a decent hem, and let that be that. I am going to take 2 inches off the bottom here. Okay, cut that straight off. Okay, so I just clipped off that 2 inches, and I'm just opening it up a little bit so I have a little give here so that I can turn my sleeve under and make a hem. But because I have that little bit of opening, it's going to be able to lay nice and flat because it's wider. It's wider up here than it is down there. You know how that goes. This end under like that, and I'm just going to stitch it by hand all the way around, little invisible whip stitches to make a nice neat little hem. Come back up here and just reinforce where it's splitting open to give me a little bit of ease so it won't go any further, and we're going to call that good for the sleeves. Well, I do have the sleeves done, and at this point they seem functional but kind of plain, but they are functional, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Maybe when I'm doing some finishing work, if I get a great idea of something to enhance it, I will, but for right now I'm just going to go ahead and put these into the bodice. So I actually have already pinned this one in, and like I said, I have the gathering threads all the way down to the notches. So if this is my underarm seam, they're right there, and I tried to make them very minimal until I get up towards the top because there is quite a bit of easing that I need to put into it. So my goal is to have a sleeve that is comfortable to wear but not super puff. So this is what I'm going to use to press my top of my sleeve. It's basically a press mitt on a couple bookends just to keep it upright. Okay, I think this should work. So I'm just going to reposition it on my little mitt, hold it down, press it with my iron. What I'm trying to do is get a as flattened out as possible top and sleeve connection here. I know I'm going to have puckers and gathers. I don't want it to be puff, you know? So there I go. It's pretty flat. I like that. Let me put it on my dress form so we can see what it looks like. Okay, so if you can see, this is the top of my shoulder there. Yes, I have gathers, but I'm trying to make it as unfluff as possible. And here's what the wrap is looking like right now. They're still in 2 separate pieces here. I need to put those 2 pieces together. While it's in 2 different pieces, while I can just deal with the skirt and not have the bodice attached, I'm just going to hem this thing. Now the bottom edge is somewhat curved. It's not an extreme curve, but it is enough of a curve that I do want to help myself by crimping the edge so that when I turn it up to hem it, it's going to already have somewhat of a gather. And crimping, I mean finger crimping on my sewing machine. But before I do that, I need to take care of these ends. And you can see on my piping, the ends will fray really quickly once I clip it. So I am going to just melt them in and seal all that in. This is more of a cotton, but this is polyester, so that blue melted and sealed up really good. Okay, so by finger crimping, what I mean is I'm going to do a straight stitch about 3 millimeter stitch length. Just get it started here. Put my finger behind my presser foot, push down, and just let it accumulate back there until I can't hold it anymore. Let it go, and then just do it again all the way across. So what that's going to do is build up a little bit of a crimp into my fabric so that when I turn it, it's going to have a slight gather into it, and it'll curve in on itself really nicely, and then I can just press a nice even hem. I'm just going to fold up a 2-inch hem, so I'll make sure I got the right there, a 2-inch hem, and then turn it under at that stitching line and pin it. And I'm just going to do that all the way around. That should, this crimping should give me a nice turned in edge. So even though it's turned under, it's still gathered. Well, I went ahead and pressed my hem, and it pressed very nicely because of my crimping, so that was a good thing. But I decided I am going to sew this by hand, just so that it's slightly invisible, and also because so far on this dress there is no top stitching. There's no visible artistic seam lines or anything on the outside. So I felt it would be kind of out of the same theme as the rest of the dress by putting a row of stitching across here. Good morning, new day, and ready to tackle the hem for the lining. Now you can see little pricks where my hem is sewn right here, but it's not super obvious, so I like that. So what I need to do, I did do some crimping stitches on my lining, but honestly the lining is just way too long for what I need. So I'm going to be clipping that off. And what I'm going to be doing is just trimming my lining so it's even with the bottom of my hem. Sorry, my little dog is coughing down there. But I'm going to trim it off so it's even with the bottom of my hem, and that way when I go to hem it up inside, if I do it like at a 1 inch or something, everything's going to be even, whereas right now you can see it's a little wonky. Let me go ahead and do that. I do have the top all pinned together so that hopefully this is the actual length and nothing is slipping down. Alright, so I have it trimmed, and I went back to my serger and just serged the edge. So now this is how it is. It's at or just barely above the edge of my other hem. And what I want my finished length of my lining to be is about like this, so that the fabric hem is lower than this one, but I want it to actually cover the top of it, you know? So I think there's probably about 3/4 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it all the way around, just turning it up once so that it's hitting at that right length. I have my lining hem all pressed, and I needed to start the edges over here, just kind of tacking them down and folding them in so that they would lie nicely. So just down the side like that, so it's going to stay folded in. And actually, now that I've gotten started with this, I think I'm actually going to hem the lining by hand also, just because it's easy and it's easy to get to this way. And I think I'm just going to do some little running stitches. I'll look at it from the inside. Just do some little running stitches all the way down because it doesn't need to hold a lot of weight. And if it's visible on the outside, that's no big deal. So then this is what it looks like on the right side, but on the wrong side, you know, I've got my long stitches here. But that is just fine. And I'm almost to the end of this, and it honestly did not take that long. Gave me a little bit of quiet time to think about life and happy thoughts and all of that. All right, so in the instructions, they don't have a lining, and they don't have piping. So what they say is just at the point you have your skirt done, you just sew the bodice to it, push the seam allowance up, which is fine if you don't have a lining or piping. But I do. And so because I have the piping and everything on the skirt already, and the way that I'm going to be sewing it onto the skirt is pulling the lining down and just sewing this fabric to its corresponding fabric, and then I will whip stitch the lining over the top so it covers up this seam allowance. So that's going to be a little bit different, but I need to get the piping up here. And this skirt is very heavy at this point, and I think it would be easier to go ahead and do the piping around the bodice here first, and then put the facing also on here. And I might not sew it all the way to the bottom. I might leave the bottom couple inches free just so I can manipulate everything a lot easier when I'm attaching it to the skirt. Which means the first thing I need to do is mark out and set my piping on my top. And when I did my skirt, remember I had it so that my bottom edge of my piping was about a fat 1/4 inch from the side. So I'm going to try to do that with the top also. So this is my whole top here. So I'm just going to start at the bottom, work my way all the way around, and then come back down here. Okay, so this is what it looks like from this side, from the back side, you know, just stitches, kind of running parallel to my stay stitching, so that's nice. So now I need to work on my facing. I'm going to use a lightweight interfacing for these, the same one that I was going to use for the cuffs that you saw earlier. So once I have it interfaced, then I do my markings, which is basically just a notch up here. I do put a little notch where my center back is going to be. And on these, it is a notch up here at the top, just so I can make sure I'm not putting my facings together the wrong way. There's also a dot down here, but that is going to be where I am matching up down at the skirt, and because of my piping it might be a little flexible because seam allowances and differences and everything, so I'm going to leave that off for right now. But what I need to do is go ahead and sew these together, so matching up my notches so I make sure I'm doing it right. Sewing these at 5/8 up here at the shoulders, pressing them open, and then I'll need to finish the sides. Okay, so this is what it looks like up here, and I did just go ahead and serge the edges. I am debating on if I should just turn it under and stitch it like that too to make the top part pretty, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm just going to leave it flat. You know, I line to the bottom for structure reasons, plus that part flaps open and everything, so I wanted that. But if my top is flapping open enough that people can see this part, I've got bigger issues than just my serged edge showing. So I'm not going to worry about that. It's time to go ahead and get this matched up onto my bodice. So when you're pinning the facing on, this point down here goes all the way off the end. There's a angle here, and that's what matches up to the bottom angle right there. But what I'm thinking as I'm looking at this, because of all of that piping and stuff, I think that I'm going to sew it while looking at this side, because I think I'll be able to feel where that piping is and see the stitching line a lot better, because the interfacing kind of it thickens it enough that I'm afraid I might go off track and go over it incorrectly, and then that would be a pain to pick off. So when I sew it, I'm going to go this way, but this is how it looks at the bottom. So you have this little edge hanging off here. So I'm going to put a mark, you know, a couple inches up here, just to remind myself that that's where I start and stop on each side, so that when I go to put it on my skirt, this will still be loose and I'll be able to sew that easier. Alright, so I've got it sewn all the way around. I got one little bitty pucker right there, but I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm going to go ahead and just make some little clips all the way around this curved edge here, just so that it will turn nicely. But I want to show you from the outside, I have all the piping, and I think it looks really neat. And using that invisible zipper foot is fabulous. So anyway, that's what it looks like now. So I'm going to go ahead, clip it, and press this flat. And just to make sure that my little facing behaves itself, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch it to the seam allowance at the shoulders to keep it from wanting to move anywhere. So now it's time to start to connect the bodice to the skirt. So I just went through and very, very long and loosely basted the lining to the skirt up here because it's not connected yet, and I didn't want the whole thing to just fall down and pull and stretch. But that gives me enough room that I can open it up and stitch on here. So let me get started matching up my bodice to my skirt. Okay, so I can match up the side seams first. Let me go ahead and pin those on. So we've got the side seams matched. These darts on the top, the dart seam matches up with the dart seam on the bottom. So from the outside, it looks like one continuous dart, which is kind of nice. Got a couple notches there to match up. And now we're going to see how this is going to work with the piping on this outside edge. So matching up this front, this is my skirt, I just have it opened. The top part, I just have it flattened out. There's my piping there. And at that point, 5/8 of an inch up, excuse me, I need to have these two piping marks intersecting at that point. So it looks like it's going to have this part sticking out a little bit, which is fine because at this point right here, the two piping marks are matching. So I'm going to stick a pin right there to hopefully hold that secure. So this here is the point in the princess seam on the top where those two come together, and that matches up with the dart on the bottom. So again, from the outside, it's going to look like that's a one big dart that continues. I think it's going to match up. Let me go ahead and get this finished up, and I'm going to run a seam at 5/8 of an inch all the way across, you know, from beginning all the way to the end, and we'll see how it matches. Alright, so I've got this seam sewed. I haven't pressed anything yet. It's just kind of laying here. And this is the edge. So I've got a lot of bulk on this corner piece that's sticking out here. And I'm going to trim that down. That's like 1/8 of an inch away. Seal that thing up again because it's stuff frays. Let's see how it looks when I fold it in. I am going to be pressing my seam allowance down. I think in the instructions they say to do it up, but I'm doing it down so that I can tuck my lining piece in. So if I do it that way, that's how it looks on the front, having those two pipings points meet, and maybe I can fold it out a little bit, but I think that's pretty good. So what I need to do now is go through here. Remember, I basted this so it wouldn't fall too terribly far down. And just, I think I'm going to start in the center back. I should go over to my ironing board and press this first. So off camera I'll do that, but then come up with my lining and tuck it under and just pin it all the way across, and then I'll just come back and whip stitch this all the way so that this whole seam allowance is caught in there, but I have a really nice finish up here. Well, I want to show you what it looks like right now, and actually I'm quite pleased with it. Let me open this up and show you how I did the inside. So if you remember, this piece actually came way down far, and in the instructions it looked like they wanted you, when it was just one layer and not lined, to just kind of continue it down and tack it in down here. So while I was putting the lining in, I just tucked that whole piece inside, and I think that works out pretty well. Now I'm going to come back and with a needle and thread, kind of like I did with the hem, I'm going to sew this entire facing down because I don't want it to come out, but it's going to be like this where there's just, you know, little pricks, so I think that that's going to be okay. And the last thing I still need to do is it calls for a snap to go right here where this princess seam meets up with this edge right here. And so I need to do that, but I don't want to put that snap on until I actually try it on and make sure that that's the right placement for my body, because, you know, different bodies are different. And even though this dress form is as close to my own body as I can, it doesn't move. And sometimes when you put something on your body that moves, it's a little bit different. But standing back, understanding that I did just undo the tie, it's looking really nice. Okay, so I wanted to show you, I am going to be putting a couple snaps in. I'm going to be putting a snap up here, you know, right there to hold it closed. And also the one that I'm going to put down here, I'm actually setting it over a couple inches from this line. And this is where they wanted it on the pattern, but I'm going to put it here because I've got room in here and I can pull it over, but because of my body shape and contours and everything, when I try to do that, it does weird things up here, you know? And so I think that my lesson from this is try it on, because even if the dimensions fit, every body shape is different, and finding what works here and around the neck and down here, it's all a placement thing. So I'm going to go ahead and put a snap here and a snap there. But, you know, so far so good. Alrighty, so I'm going to show you how I have to sit down. Pushing my skirt over, hiking it up, keeping it folded, sitting down. We've made it. And I think when I'm standing up, it's beautiful. When I'm taking small steps, it works really well. When I take large steps, everything shows all the way up my thigh. And if I was younger and had lovely legs, or I was wearing some really nice suntanny kind of stockings, that might be okay. But today it's kind of a self-conscious thing, you know? And the wrap in the front, you know, it's a nice silhouette, it really is. But because it's kind of a narrow wrap, it doesn't go like full coverage all the way to the side seams. It doesn't feel like that to me. I mean, technically it kind of does, but it doesn't feel that way. When you go to sit down, if you don't carefully fold everything when you sit, it like splits way open all the way. So there's that. And then there were the sleeves, and the sleeves work great for me now, but I had to add a couple inches, you know, and I had to change the length. So I should say the sleeves work good for me. My sleeves work good for me. Their sleeves stunk. Here's something that boggles my mind. My pattern set went from size 16 to size 24, okay? You saw how narrow my sleeve was for size 16. The size 24 was only 1 inch wider on each side. Now you tell me, someone who's wearing a size 24 in a pattern, which is, you know, larger than a size 24 in ready-made, who's going to have that narrow of an arm? The proportions just aren't right, so be aware. Now, is the finished dress pretty? Sure. And I might wear it if it's a stand-up type event, and I will probably put a little snap or something over here, or a hook or something in an inconspicuous place to try to keep it somewhat closed up at the very top area, you know, maybe like 9 inches down or so, just so it doesn't split all the way open if I have to walk upstairs. I don't think I'll make it again. I think that the one good thing out of this is the top bodice, because it does have that multiple cup size fit. You can get a nice princess seam, full bust, or whatever your bust size is, standard pattern out of it to then overlay on other princess seam patterns that you might come across, and that could help you adjust it. And that did work. The princess seam pieces for the size C cup worked on my body. So, you know, that was a good thing, because I've done some of these selected cup size ones where the proportions were way off. So that was a good thing. But, you know, I think it's a pretty fabric. There's a couple things about the fabric that are odd, but, you know, it's a pretty fabric. And like I said, if I'm standing still or just taking small steps, I think it would work. So maybe it's go to a cocktail party where you just stand around, but I don't go to cocktail parties where I just stand around, but you know, that kind of a thing. So anyhow, hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.